Welcome, and this is the end of your first week of Music 810 Curriculum and Assessment. And we're going to take a look now specifically on beginning to develop program goals and thinking about the wording, construction of overall the big picture curriculum, and really look at it at how it refines down into specific instructional objectives. So I'm going to start this presentation here. Okay, and there are going to be a couple times where I'm going to flip back and forth because I also want you to see what you should have handy is the handout. And so it says handout Music 810. Be sure that you have that with you because we're going to be working through that, the first couple sections of that today. So where we left off last time was on a sheet of paper. We had you write an individual statement about what you expect students in your music program to be able to do when they leave your program. So there are four areas that we first have to think about when we go through the process of creating significant learning experiences for our students. Number one, situational factors. Everything that surrounds our students, our program, our community, our district, our school building, all of that plays into what's going to impact the students and how we're able to design instruction. The next thing we want to look at are learning goals. So what is it that we want our students to be able to do? Okay. Then feedback and assessment, which we will get to, and then overall teaching and learning activities. Now, all of these work together in a cycle. Okay. So what you're going to see is that in this cycle, we have learning goals, teaching and learning activities, feedback and assessment. And you'll notice that the arrows are two ways, okay? So when we talk about backward planning, we're talking about looking at where we want our students at the end, backing up to where they're at, and then being able to sequence instruction to get them to that program goal. Well, in order for us to be able to write these goals, we need to know what is going on with the students, where they're at, with the community, where they are at, the school building, where they are at, the faculty. There's so many different things that we have to consider, but that's what the situational factors are, the first thing that you want to look at, because that's going to dictate how you write your goals, the thinking level of how you're going to write your goals. It's also going to impact your teaching and learning activities, and it's going to dictate how you provide feedback, how you design assessment, but understanding that all of those have to go on simultaneously. So as we're planning for where we want our students to be at the end, we need to know what factors are influencing our students. So some things to think about with situational factors, okay? It's context, expectations, nature of the subject, characteristics of the learners, characteristics of the teacher, special pedagogical challenges. All right, so you want to be thinking about all of these things. How well do you mesh with the students? How well do the students mesh with you? How well do the students mesh with the school community? How well do you mesh with the school community? How does that all work together? Then what is the role of music within the building? What's the role of music within your program? All of those things need to be explored and reflected upon. Then what are some of the special pedagogical challenges? Every program has idiosyncrasies. It's just the way things are, and we have to build that into our planning. We have to build that into our long-range planning. We also have to build that into our short-range planning. So what I want you to do is, using the sheet in Canvas marked Handout Music 810, and I am actually going to go to Word, and I don't think, hopefully you can see this. I'm actually going to turn on my secondary monitor so that I can see what is going on, because I'm going to actually be able to tell what you can see. And so I'm going to bring this over here. And what I want you to notice here is I've got everything lined out. And I'm going to be looking over here because this is where my screen is that you see, is that we have specific context. How many students, level of the course, length and frequency of meeting. All of this is going to have bearing on how you design instruction, the amount of content that you can cover within a specific semester, within a year, within a program. What does society expect with regard to this subject? Society can be reframed. Okay, so you can think of this more as community, if you want. What about professional societies? Do they have impact on learning goals? This is going to be specific for you with understanding what is being required of you in terms of the Kansas state standards, which are essentially the same as the 2014 national standards. It's no longer the 9 national standards, but the 2014 create, perform, respond, and then all the artistic processes below. Now, keep in mind, for this answer, you're going to say the 2014 standards. We're going to go over those in just a few minutes so that it will help kind of filter down through. Okay, what about my district's learning goals? Now, I can tell you, for instance, my wife's an elementary music teacher, and she sequences her teaching one way, but she might hit certain concepts at different age levels than what the district does. She still covers everything K through 6, but she wants to teach it in a specific sequence. So there will be things that are moved around from time to time. That may be the same for you as well. So you want to be able to, right here, understand what your district's learning goals are. But if your principal asks, why did you do this a little bit differently? Then you've given it some thought and you've got a foundation for why it's happening. It's not, well, I'm just more comfortable teaching it this way. You can put out there, here are my goals. Here are where I want my students at the end of year 1. Here's where I want them at the year of end 2. Or end of year 2. That's why it's important to start with the backward in mind. That's why it's important for you to say, when they leave my program, this is going to happen, and then work yourself back with these goals to get back to where they're at. Okay? And this is part of the reflecting process to be able to tease some of that information out. What is the nature of the subject? Is the subject convergent or divergent? Okay, is the subject primarily cognitive, or is there a physical component as well? Okay, those of you that are doing show choir or marching band, that's going to play into how you design some of your content. Okay, is the field stable? Is it in a state of rapid change, or are there competing paradigms? Okay, so there's a couple things for us to consider here. I would say primarily it's stable. Okay, for music education, at least generally right now. But there are some competing paradigms that we really have to think about. We have to think about this idea of how are we accessing the other 80%? Are there constructs in place that don't allow for all students that really want to take music? Are there and one is going to be the paradigm of music technology, paradigm of secondary general music, paradigm of modern band. Those of you that aren't familiar with modern band, definitely check it out. Google Brian Powell and modern band. And what you're going to see, you're going to run across Little Kids Rock. You're going to run across a lot of different concepts of how do we bring modern band into the current music education classroom. So those are some competing paradigms that you want to consider, and how do they coexist? Maybe you're trying to design one of those courses. Okay, so keep that in mind. Characteristics of the learner, students' life situations, their reasons for enrolling, prior experience, learning styles, understanding everything that's there. And with learning styles, you're going to be thinking of a specific classroom, and you might be able to categorize them so that you have a percentage of auditory learners, visual learners, kinesthetic learners. And then that's going to impact how you design learning activities. That's going to impact how you construct your curriculum, and the balance. Not when we talk about balance, it does not mean an equal split. What balance means is that it aligns with your clientele. Okay, so now all of a sudden, when I'm designing, a lot of times we design teaching and learning activities that make sense to us, that fit with our style of learning. And then we try to create other experiences, and then if they don't work, we go right back to ours. So how can we look to see that we get a balance to meet our learners where they are? Okay, characteristics of the teacher, your experience and knowledge and attitudes towards this subject. We all know those times that we're teaching things that we really don't enjoy teaching, but we teach it anyway because the students need it. So how are we going to go about that? Okay, and we have to be open and honest about that in our curriculum design process. Have you taught the subject before? Are you teaching it again? Confidence and ability, prior experience with the process of teaching. All of this goes into trying to decide how it's going to impact what we do moving forward. Okay, special pedagogical challenge, special situation in the course that challenges students and the teacher to make the experience meaningful. Okay, so what I want you to do is, using this sheet, I want you to hit pause, and I want you to go through and I want you to fill this part out and be as honest as possible with yourself, and try and create a meaningful list and a meaningful reflection using these questions as guides. You may think of other things that need to be included on here. Please include those. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just a list to get your brain going. Okay, so go ahead and hit pause, and when we come back, we will begin the process of then filtering this down a little bit further into program goals. All right, welcome back. I hope that process was meaningful for you. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring this back over here, and we're going to go on to the next slide. So getting into developing program goals, okay? So we need to look at it from 6 different areas. Okay, number 1, what do the students need to know? What is that foundational knowledge that all students that leave your program, what is that foundational knowledge that they need to possess? Okay, and we're not going to go through all of those iterations right now in music, but you can rest assured that we're going to be talking about notation. We're going to be talking about writing. We're going to be talking about matching pitch. We're going to be talking about intonation. We're going to be talking about historical foundations. We're going to be talking about composer knowledge. All of that. What are the non-negotiables? What is it that your students have to be successful? Now, this list is going to take you a while, and I'll pull the form back up here in just a moment, and you'll notice in the form I don't give you a whole lot of room to work with, so you're going to have to type into your Word document and expand that table. But that's what you have to do. You have to be able to pull in everything that they need to know. And why is that important? Well, we can't just say, well, they need to know everything. What we have to do is we're going to have to prioritize, because the reality is we can't physically teach everything they need to know in the 4 years or the 2 years or the 3 years that we have them. So what we have to do is we have to look at what is everything that they need to know. And then how can we begin to do a simple factor analysis, okay, which is starting to group all of these concepts into bigger concepts, to where now I teach the primary concepts, but then I create homework, projects, group projects that begin to make them apply knowledge that they're learning. Applying that remember, foundational knowledge is not everything they need to know. What it is the foundation of a musical knowledge. So now if we give them the foundation and we also give them the tools to know how to search, how to construct knowledge, now all of a sudden they can apply this knowledge in a new way, in a new environment, and be able to teach it to their colleagues. So with that in mind, we also have to understand application. What skills do they need to be able to apply this knowledge? Okay. And then that's also going to help us in how to design our rehearsals, how to sequence instruction. All right. And then how are we integrating? How do these fit together? And then we're getting into the human dimension. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be, how do we learn how to learn? How do we learn to be empathetic? How does all of this play into the student's learning? Okay. And if we keep all of this in mind, it's going to create a more significant learning experience for your students. Okay. So within music, you want your program goals to be broad. Okay. Again, we're not down to course goals yet. You're going to go program goals to course goals to then specific learning goals. Okay. And each one leads to the next. So your program goals are 3 years wide, 4 years wide. Your course goals are 1 year. So in your first year, you're going to learn X, Y, and Z. Your second year, so on and so forth. That leads you to the 4-year goal. Then within your course, you've got a sequence of experiences and a sequence of activities that are going to help you achieve the course goals. And all of those, they can be the same. You can have similar activities, but change content and focus of assessment. So you're not having to do different activities every year, but how you approach the activities are different. All right. So remember that your program goals are going to be broad. Through this process, when we go into writing goals and getting into the individual learning goals, I want you to think about this on a few planes. Number one, I want you to think program goals, which is right now where we're at. Broad, it identifies the understanding, knowledge, and skills. It reflects your philosophy clearly, and it's linked to the artistic processes of creating, performing, and responding. Okay, so you want that overarching, and that's where I want you to start. Is I want you, using the template, work to start refining what your learning goals might be for your specific area. Okay, include as many kinds of significant learning as possible, and link your learning goals really ultimately to your own dreams. Now, keep in mind, one of the things that we can do, let me go here to, I'm going to pull up the handout again. And what I want you to look at here is what I have done is I've actually gone in and I've built this table for you. So we've got foundational knowledge, application, okay? So here is levels of thinking, skills, potential projects, where they could be they can be applying these key concepts and perspectives. Remember, this is not everything they need to know. What you want to do is you want to list everything they need to know and then begin grouping them into larger concepts, okay? Connections within the course, other courses, and life outside of school. How are you going to integrate this in more than just a class project? How do you make this meaningful and applicable to them? Okay. And then self-learning, interpersonal, the caring and empathy part. That comes from you, that comes from interpersonal relationships with them within the class, and then learning how to learn, and that's self-knowledge. We've talked about making ourselves obsolete. Well, that's part of a significant learning process. Okay, so using this template, okay, this will help you keep track of developing the foundations of your program goals. And I want you to do this on two levels. I do want you to do program goals, and I want you to start sketching those out. But then I want you to begin thinking about, once you have those pretty well set, I want you to start mapping out, what does that look like for the duration of someone in my program? And how am I going to break that into a 3-year sequence or a 4-year sequence? You're not going to have all the answers right now. I want you to map it out so that you can, if you're visual, map it out so that you can see it. Do a word web so that you can see how it all fits together. If you are, if you need to write it down, then what I want you to do is I want you to write an outline. If you need to create a voice memo to remind yourself, especially if you're auditory. If you're kinesthetic, then use Legos to put those together to see how it all fits together. Color coding. So there are a lot of different ways that you can approach this, but I want you to think program goals, and then I want you to think course goals and how you're going to break those program goals down. Okay, and you'll notice here that I've given you an idea of, now you can begin to cover all of that information. So this gives us idea on the course that you want to build, and then this gives you an idea on what you want the students to learn once they leave your program. Now, what I haven't given you a lot of room on here to do, this is more to develop your ideas. This is for you to be able to brainstorm. Okay? This is for you to say, all right, here's the course. Here are the situational factors. Here's what I want them to do. What you will do between here and here, where it says stage 1, establishing the learning goals, okay, is you're going to write the program goals and your course goals. Now remember, that's the 3-year, 4-year goals, and then the individual years amongst themselves that are sequenced to build them to that point. Okay, that's what I want you to do right now. Nothing else. So you're going to stop at the end of page 2. So go ahead and hit pause. And when you hit pause, I am actually going to move it over to here to give you 2 tips. Okay? And I want you to hit pause. I want you to work on page 2. Begin sorting through that information. And when we come back, we will take it a step further. Welcome back. Now we want to look at goals and objectives. We're actually now going to move into, essentially, goals are long-term, objectives are more in the short term. Goals are more for programs and courses. Objectives are going to be specifically for units. So or let's say, for instance, those of you that teach secondary, this would be more, objectives would be for a piece of music. What are your learning objectives for a piece of music? And then at the lesson level. So it's, objectives are much more atomic. And we're looking at it at the nuclear level, the small level, and then we would grow it out for the others. Okay, so what we're looking at and where we're at is we've built the general program goals. And I'm not for sure. Oh, sorry about that. We've built the general program goals. Now what we want to look at is we want to look at the general outline. Okay, that general outline is going to be those course goals, that year by year process to build into the program goals. Then we want to look under within each year, and now let's start looking at what are the specific objectives. Okay, now those of you that, let's say for instance, if you're doing, like for instance, Sean, you said you're doing a beginning band proposal. That's going to look different than Sam, who might be doing the music technology, or Tiffany, you had mentioned doing something with your choir and being able to weave in the new district curriculum and how you were going to weave that into your overall. And a lot of this ends up being a situational factor because they're going to a different schedule, and how you're going to have to break up the time and see that you see them at different times. That is going to be, that situational factor is going to change what concepts you hit when, and how you stack them, and how you have the students interact with the content. Okay, and that's where changing the specific objectives is going to be important. Okay, and then as you can tell, we are going to really weave this down and whittle it down into instruction. So instructional objectives. I put in here what was the objective of the exercise. Here is what I would do. Okay. Let me back this up. What I want you to do is I want you to take a piece of paper. And on that piece of paper, I want you to label it like this. You'll see 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? And what I want you to do is I want you to put your left thumb on the 1, and I want you to put your index finger behind it, and you're going to fold the 1 almost, actually, I lied. I want you to do one thing first. Go ahead and fold it hot dog. Not hamburger. Folded hot dog. It's going to look a little something like this. And when you open it up, that goes right down the middle. So you can see the crease is in between the 2 and the 3. So then I want you to take the 1, and I want you to move it down over the 2, but don't cross the middle line. So it's going to look like this. Look like a giant dog-eared page. And then you're going to take the 4, and you're going to put it on top of the 3. We're going to get what looks sort of like a house. I'll hold it back a little bit like this. So take just a moment, see if it looks the same. Now, what I want you to do next is I want you to take your left hand, and you're going to take the eave of the house, which is right here, and you're going to fold it in to the center to where it aligns with the crease. It's going to look like this. Now, do the same thing with the other side, and it's going to look almost exactly like a Star Trek symbol. Or the way the shadows are showing in here, it almost looks like the Delta logo from Delta Airlines. Okay? Now, you're going to fold it in half like this. All right, so the next process is that you're going to take the edge, one edge, and you're going to fold it down. To where it looks like this. So you'll notice, well, all I've done is I've taken it, laid it on the spine, and then all I've done is fold this down and make a crease. And what I want to do now is I want to do the same thing with the other side. I'm going to take it, I'm going to fold it, and it's going to look like that. So when I flip it up, it looks like this. Now, next thing that you're going to do is you're going to take the spine, this part right here, and you're going to put it between your thumb and your forefinger. And typically what I like to do is I like to hold it right about a third of the way from the nose. Okay? Practice once with me. Put your wrist over your elbow, and all you're going to do is you're going to rock back and point. Do that with me. Ready? Rock back, point. Now, what we're going to do next, when we rock back and we point, what we're going to do is we're going to put the airplane in it, we're going to rock back, and we're going to point. Okay? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Rock back, point. Did your airplane fly? Okay? So, let's walk through this process for just a moment. Okay, what was the objective of the exercise? Most of you will probably say it was to build an airplane. Okay, now there are a couple things that we can deduce from this. Number one, if I would have said we're going to make a paper airplane, you have 30 seconds to make a paper airplane. What do you think would have happened? We would have gotten a lot of different types of airplanes. Okay, but I wanted a specific glider, okay, which is what we used. In our face-to-face, if we were in a classroom, we would go out and we would test this. And then we would come back and we would, I put a line in the hallway and we throw the paper airplanes. And we talk about how far they went. And then what I do is I give you a chance to try it again. Ultimately, I want you to make the adjustments. I want you trying to evaluate, make something better, come back, and we do it again. Okay, so this doubles as both an instructional objective and an assessment exercise. Okay, I'm actually preparing for assessment down the road, but I'm using this as in terms of an instructional objective. So there are 3 parts. Okay. And these 3 parts are critical in being specific and in really aligning your objectives to your course goals, to your program goals. All 3 of these are critical in order for you to be able to be specific and to actually see how they all fit together. Okay, the first is the conditions or the set. What are the students given? What do they need to be successful? Okay. Then we have to have an action verb. What are the students doing? Now remember, when we talk about learning in general, students learn best by doing. They learn best by hands-on. They learn best by interacting with the content and interacting with each other. If we know that to be true, then the students have to be active. They cannot be passive learners. Some students will learn like that if they just sit and listen, or if they just sit and absorb. But there is an action there. So we have to put our fingers on what are those action verbs. How are we going to get the students active? Okay, and then with instructional objectives, when we talk about course down to unit objectives, or we talk down to lesson objectives, there has to be a set of criteria. That criteria, the criteria are, what are the indicators? How will I know my students have been successful? I know that I'm not going to get 100% every single time. Okay, but I do want to set thresholds so that I know what my expectations are. All right, so 3 parts: conditions, action, verb, criteria. So for that activity, okay, it was students will, given a piece of paper and a model, students will create a paper airplane that will fly at least 15 feet. Okay, so now I have a distance. I have, you are creating something and you're given paper and a model. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to think about, you've whittled down from a program goal to a course goal. Now what I want you to do is I want you to think of a possible activity that they could be doing, or a possible unit that you're going to be studying. And I want you to write an instructional objective that would lead to one of your course goals that has all 3 parts of an instructional objective. So let's walk through this for just a moment, okay? Before we get into that, I wanted to walk through this. So given a paper and a model, students will demonstrate construction of a paper airplane. And there I would actually change that to create, only because demonstrating construction and creating, same thing, that will fly and come to rest at a minimum distance of 20 feet. Okay, so we know that the students are active, we see the set, and we have the criteria. Okay, so let's put this in terms of music. So conditions, or the set. Okay, who are the students? Characteristics. What will the students have? What will the students be able to do at the end of the program, course, or lesson? Okay, so this can be using a speech ostinato, or by the end of class, students will, or given a piece of paper and a model, given a coin and a model, students will perform a sleight of hand trick with fewer than 3 errors. Something along those lines. Given a coin and a model, using a speech ostinato. Okay? Action verb. Students must be doing something. Information does not magically appear or disappear. Students learn by doing and participating. So some good action verbs: perform, communicate, classify, compose, design, evaluate, performing, responding, creating. All of those, you can make it align with Bloom's taxonomy. You can make it align with the national standards, but use those action words. Avoid passive verbs. Will be able to. They're all able to do it when they walk in your classroom. So the minute you say students will be able to, well, they're already able to do it. So why teach? Why actually go through with your lesson? So you want to avoid be able, is, am, have, been, being. You want to make sure that you make the students primary and right on top of it, okay, and part of the equation. So students compose a 4-measure canon incorporating body percussion and speech. So now we have a very clear idea of students are composing. They're composing a 4-measure canon incorporating body percussion and speech. So we're not really talking a whole lot about melody here. We're not talking instruments. We're talking something that is active, that is hands-on, and now we know what our direction is. Okay, now this could be for any number of things. This could be perhaps they're writing a canon that is inspired by a piece that they are currently playing in beginning orchestra, and in order to take line 77, which is only 12 or 16 measures long in our beginning books, we need to create a student composition. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to create a ritornello with a body percussion. That is, and so the first time the entire group plays, second time, and then we move into the body percussion. Second time, just the violins play. Then we come back to the body percussion, and then so on and so forth. You see where we're going with this. there's a lot of different ways that we can approach it. And then the criteria. How will you assess the task? To what extent will the class be able to master the instructional outcome? We have to set these thresholds early on. Now, what you're also going to be thinking about in terms of criteria are going to be understood at the program level and the course level. Okay? You're going to set those because there is a start point for year 2. There is a start point for N3. There is an end point for your program goals. So you know where that line is. This process is breaking it down even more incrementally so that you know where they are along this process. Okay? Be specific in the criteria. Avoid using terms most of the time, usually play correct notes. Most of the notes were right. It was pretty good. Avoid those. So think about how you could break that down with fewer than 4 mistakes. Okay? So with at least 3 separate timbres and fewer than 2 mistakes in meter. Now, at this point, what we're looking at is we're counting mistakes, okay? And we're counting their ability to play with timbre, all right? But we might go in and we might want to measure musicality as well, okay? And avoid going into just counting instances, but get into being able to say, did they perform musically? Okay, and you can add that in as well. This is only one line of criteria. So when we put it all together, the instructional objective reads, using a speech ostinato, students will compose a 4-measure canon incorporating body percussion and speech with at least 3 separate timbres and fewer than 2 mistakes in meter. Okay, so now I'm looking at their ability, their rhythm and meter, and I'm looking at how well they're performing. Okay, now we can break this up a lot of different ways. I'm only looking at one level of criteria here. We can add more. Okay, so there are different types of outcomes. Okay, the one we're looking at is skill outcomes, so performance, perception. But there are also knowledge outcomes, okay? How much they know about something. So some of our outcomes, now remember, this is going to filter up as well. So when we write our program goals, remember in that initial table that you filled out, you're looking at what's the foundational knowledge, what are the application knowledge, the human dimension, the integration, the ability to learn how to learn, okay, which could be teaching activities or peer teaching activities, peer response activities, peer evaluation activities. Those will learn how to learn, okay, so those are great activities for being able to do that. Well, what knowledge do they need to know in order to make that happen? What skills do they have to have? This goes beyond the music itself because we're having to organize all of this, okay? And what about the affective and the aesthetic, okay? These are what you want to consider. So what I've done on the next couple slides is I've really lined out for you some things to think about. So skill outcomes could be scales, could be double tonguing, playing chromatic scales. It could be correct notes. It could be correct rhythms. It can be any number of things. Okay, knowledge outcomes. It could be this could be music history. This could be this kind of experience and understanding defines a successful knowledge outcome. Given a Bach 2-part invention, students will identify both the motive and counter motive with no mistakes. So, for instance, this student understand, if they're able to identify it, I know they understand that they have a strong understanding or a working understanding of the terms motif and counter motif. Okay. What do they know about Bach? Okay, what do they know about two-part inventions? That's a whole nother level of knowledge outcomes. But these are outcomes that will work really well. What about the affective? The affective are the most difficult to write, and they're the most difficult to assess, but they're often long-term. They're the heart of our profession. Given a Bach two-part invention, students will evaluate the counterpoint and critique the effectiveness of each compositional tool using correct rhetoric and logic. Now, how many sixth graders could do this? Probably not many. But what we can say is that we can lead our students to be able to do that. We can lead them to be able to critique and to be able to evaluate music at a very early age. But we have to start young, and we have to start simple and continue to add to the complexity. Okay, how does that fit within your program goals? Do you have program goals that are really looking at not necessarily the idea of overall appreciating music, but the idea to be able to critique, the ability to evaluate, the ability to self-assess, the ability to peer assess, the ability to diagnose and respond within a practice session? Can they diagnose the problems? And then can they prescribe the corrective measures? Okay, those are affective outcomes. And then also with affective comes the the feeling part of it. How are they connecting with the music? Again, this might be long-term, but in your course goals, each year you've got to start from zero or wherever they're at and bring them along so that by the time they graduate, by the time they leave your program, they have developed these affective skills. And again, that ties directly into their physical skills, their musical skills, their pedagogical skills, their assessment skills. And it's a much, much bigger term. So some things to think about, because a lot of times we get caught in the lower end. Okay, so I'm going to pull this up real quick. There we go. What you're going to find here is that with the new Blooms, they have changed the words on the last two from synthesis and evaluation to evaluation and create. So they flip-flopped them, and they changed synthesis to actually creating, which is composing, arranging, designing. So here are some words to think about, but a lot of times think about these words and what we're requiring them to do, not only in our program goals, in our course goals, in our unit objectives, down to our lesson objectives. Is there a balance between what we would consider higher order thinking skills, which are these first three levels: knowledge, comprehension, and application, and an equal balance of analyzing, evaluating, and creating? Are we doing a good job of balancing the higher order thinking skills with the lower order thinking skills? Okay, and higher order and lower order is not a good bad. But if we spend a majority of our time in the lower order thinking skills and we are not requiring them to critically think, we are not leading our students to self-sufficiency in music, in practicing, in all of those things that we want for our students. So, and we might be doing it, but it's going beyond what our goals are stating. So sometimes it's, well, I'm already doing it, great, but how can we make your goals reflect what it is that you're doing in the classroom? So sometimes this is a introspection and looking back at what we do and how we articulate it. Okay? Again, food for thought. So the last thing that we'll weave into this is then the national standards, okay? And what we need to know is that it's creating, performing, and responding, okay? So the first is creating. Within creating, you'll see that you've got 4 process components, okay, which is imagine, plan and make, evaluate and refine, and present. All right. So there, that is the process. That's the creating process. We imagine it first, we plan and make it, we map it out, we create it. Now we're going to evaluate it, and then we're going to refine it. Okay, and that can be through self-assessment, peer assessment, teacher assessment. You set that up, and then we present it. Well, the present it could be turning it in. The present could be having it played. Okay, but there is some way to present that. Same way with performing. There is select, analyze, interpret, rehearse, evaluate, and refine, and present. So why does a student select a specific piece of music? And then have the student analyze it. Okay? How are they making musical decisions through their interpretation? Then have them create a rehearsal plan, evaluate, refine. So think about this in terms of rather than saying we're going to do practice reports and you're going to say how many minutes you practiced, you're going to turn in on the class Facebook page. Or a lot of people are using Edmodo. Now you can use Edmodo, or you can use Canvas. A lot of districts are going to Canvas, and you say, okay, here's what you're going to turn in. You're going to tell me what you have to select at least a 16 bar or 32 bar excerpt from one of the pieces that we're working on. You need to analyze what was wrong with it, why you selected it, and then you need to talk about your musical interpretation of it, and then you need to record yourself rehearsing it, and then you need to fill out this reflection, evaluating what you heard, what you worked on, what got better, what needs continued work, and what your plan is to be able to do that. And then the present eventually is the final product. So that's down the road a little bit. But you can see how this goes a lot deeper than just the final product, because now we're getting to see the learning process in between. And then finally with responding, why do they select specific music to listen to? How do they analyze it? How do they interpret it? How are they evaluating? So with that in mind, I do want to go back for just a moment before we get to the last slide. And at this point, we should have everything here, okay, up to page 2 done. Now this top part, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to look at your program goals that you have written, and I want you to look at your course goals. And then within each one of those, underneath each course goal, I want you to write some essential questions. What are the questions that must be answered during that course or during that year that every student must be able to answer? And again, these are going to be broader because they're year long. Okay, and what are the essential understandings? Okay, so I want you to brainstorm. This is going to help you really begin to tease out how to write those objectives that are going to lead to the course goals. And specifically, it might be, you might break it down into, so for instance, the reason that we're looking at the essential questions, understandings, and then the knowledge, skill, and affective is we need to get a balance in each year. Once we get the balance in each year, then what we have to do is we have to go through and say, okay, how are we going to design this? Are we going to have a series of 6 units? And maybe this unit is on style, this unit is on rhythm, this unit, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can skin that cat, but in your mind, you have to organize it in such a way that you can say, all right, here's a unit. And then what you're going to do is you're going to write a set of unit goals or unit objectives for each one of those. And then once you have those in place and you're able to put them in the right order to get them to be able to answer those essential questions at the end of the year, which are meeting your course goals, which are leading them to your program goals. You see how it's all there's this linear thought to it. Okay. Now we can write specific unit objectives. And then right below that, you get into instructional objectives. So now you're breaking it down into specific lessons. That's how you weave and whittle down into the atomic level. Okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at refining your earlier goals, and I want you to include that set action verb with the criteria understood, okay? Because remember, we're talking about the goals at this point. Reflect on the levels of thinking that it will require and how it will fit. Provide a version of lower order thinking and one for higher order thinking. What I want you to think about is with this final level is I want you to have, in whatever way that makes sense to you, is I want you to have your program goals. I want you to have your course goals for each of those. And some of you, if you're middle school and you only have 6th, 7th, and 8th, you're only going to have 3 course goals, 3 sets of course goals, okay? Those of you that are high school, you may have 4. 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. Okay. Then underneath those course goals, now program goals, you may have 5 to 7 for your program. But remember, you wanted to cover all of those areas. You wanted to cover the knowledge. You wanted to cover the affective. You wanted to cover the skills that they're going to be able to do. So you want to make sure that it covers everything, but that it's broad enough to envelop your entire program. Your course goals are then, what I want you to do is I want you to, the end of your senior year or the end of your 8th grade year, that really ultimately is meeting your program goals. So you work backwards to where you get the students. And I want you to have, you're probably looking at, again, 5 to 7 course goals for each one that lead them to that ultimate completion of your program. And then I want you sketching out an idea of what are some ideas of units? What are some ideas of concepts that we can cover that are going to get them to that point? What are some of the bigger ideas that are going to help us? Again, that comes back into that foundational knowledge. That's why we had you sketch all of that out in page 2. And so what I want you to do is on a piece of paper or any way that you can conceptualize this, I want you to begin organizing all of this information, okay? You don't have to have everything completed, especially by the time you get here for residency week. What I do want you to have, though, is I want you to have the information that you need in these documents, and I want you to begin organizing it in a way that makes sense to you, okay? Hopefully this has been helpful. I know this is a lot of information, but just continue working your way through this information. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at any time and I will get back with you. Best of luck in this process. I know the first time through really thinking about it this way, it's a little bit different. But again, continue working through it, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.